We make promises to ourselves all the time, but are we keeping those promises? How to get motivated to make changes in your life today at Live on Purpose TV. This is a question that comes up a lot because we want an upgrade. Have you noticed this, Dan?
I always want an upgrade.
Everybody wants an upgrade.
Right?
How do we get ourselves motivated to make those changes to actually improve or upgrade our life? I want to introduce you today to Dan Hartman. Dan is a Live on Purpose certified coach. That means he's been through the training and experience to share the ideas that we teach here at Live on Purpose. And Dan, you've been through some of your own experiences with this, haven't you?
I have, Dr. Paul, and I'm always learning.
Can you just share with our viewers today a little bit about your story and where you're coming from? Because I think that's going to create a context that helps them to see why your story is so relevant to this topic.
Absolutely, Dr. Paul. So, like Dr. Paul said, Dan Hartman, I'm a Live on Purpose certified coach. Dr. Paul has been a personal mentor of mine for 6 years. And throughout the 6 years, we've had a lot of great experiences and talks. And one of the things I've always wanted to learn more about in my business life and my personal life is, Dr. Paul, how can I get more motivated? And what can I do to be better in life? And a discussion we were having 2 years ago was I wanted to be more motivated in doing better with my health. At the time, I just wasn't exercising very much. And I came in here and I gave them all the reasons why. Okay, well, I'm busy at work. I have this and this going on. And
there's always 10, 15 reasons.
There always is. But Dr. Paul cut through that pretty quickly. And I said, Dr. Paul, how do I get motivated? I want to get motivated. What can I do for motivation so I can exercise more and be more active? Mm-hmm. So Dr. Paul asked me 2 questions that day. The first question, he said, do you have a checkbook on you, and how much is in your bank account? Now, first of all, I was really, really curious why you were asking that. And it's really interesting because A, I never carry a checkbook with me. I write like 1 or 2 checks a year, if that. And B, I usually only have maybe, a couple $1,000s in my bank account to cover the expenses. But that day, for whatever reason, I had a checkbook with me in my laptop bag. And I also had $10,000 in my checking account because I had received a sales bonus about a week before that I had not yet allocated to anything. So Dr. Paul said, Dan, you have $10,000 in your account. You have a checkbook. I want you to write me a check for $5,000. Now, I trust this man.
You got nervous at that point.
I actually kind of got excited and wondering, okay, this is kind of cool, but I got more nervous when you told me what you were going to do with it. So I wrote Dr. Paul a check for $5,000. In fact, I have the check right here.
Oh, you brought the check.
Oh, I brought the check right here. In fact, 2 years ago, right there, June 16th, 2016, for $5,000. And I put in here life advice on the,
life
little
advice
memo.
I remember that.
So I gave him this check, and then he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put this in a file, and you, over the next 21 days, are going to walk for 1 mile a day. And he said, Dan, if you don't walk 1 mile a day, if you miss 1 day, I'm cashing your check. And that's when I got scared.
Can I add something
Please.
here, Dan? Because have you noticed that sometimes people have different recollections of the same story? And the way I'm remembering this, Dan, I had asked you, what is it that you've been promising yourself that you would do, right? Because we do this all the time. We make promises to ourselves, and then we find ourselves not keeping those promises or coming up with those 10 or 15 reasons why we can't, or why it's hard, or why it's not going to work for us.
Yep.
And I remember as I was talking to you about this, I asked you, what is it that you're promising yourself to do? Well, I'm promising myself that I'm going to get more active. I'm going to get out and move and work on my health. Well, what do you mean? Well, like walking. Okay, and the goal or the promise came from you.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
I think that's important because you're not doing this for me.
Correct, yep.
I'm here to help you get out of your own way so that you can do what you're promising yourself. And I remember you said, I think I could walk 1 mile a day.
Yep.
I could do that. And we spent some time making sure that you were committed.
Right. That's right. Thank you for that. And that is what I wanted to do. I mean, at the time, I just wanted to get started, and I wanted to be consistent in something.
Right.
And this brings up a very important principle about how to get motivated, and that talks about pleasure versus pain. See, at the time, My version of pleasure was sitting on the couch watching Netflix for an hour. My version of pain was putting on my tennis shoes and walking a mile. But I knew that it wasn't pleasurable long term because I was out of shape. I wasn't happy. I wanted to have more energy so I could run around with my son. That's why I was talking to Dr. Paul. I wanted to get motivated. So I knew in my mind that yes, I need to walk and walking's good, but I didn't find that motivation. So what Paul was able to do, and what he told me going back to this story, is he said, again, if you don't do this one of these days, I'm going to cash this check. And you said, I will. And I believed
I
you.
promised.
I believed you. And so here I leave his office. It was like 4:30 in the afternoon. And I go home that day. And I actually had a date that night at 6 o'clock p.m. And I actually texted her and said, hey, I got some things that came up. Is there any way we can meet at 7 o'clock? Because I wasn't going to go on this date thinking about I had to get my walk done that day. So I did my mile walk. And then I was so worried about losing that money because that $5,000 meant way more to me than walking a mile a day. And this is what we're going to talk about what means more in the pain and the pleasure.
Right.
So because that $5,000 meant more to me, way more, losing that than walking a mile a day, I was making sure it happened. So I had on my phone an alarm every day at 8 o'clock that said, did you go on your walk? I had a second alarm on my phone that said, are you sure you went on your walk? I had a third alarm. I'm serious. I had a third alarm on my phone that says, are you sure you're sure? Because I didn't, you know how we get phone alarms. We're like, oh, I'll dismiss that. I'll do that later. I did not want to think that I was going to miss that. But here's what happened. As I went through that 21 days, every day I was like, okay, I got to get my walk done. Got to check that box. Don't want to lose that $5,000. But slowly I started enjoying the walk. I enjoyed being out there in nature. I enjoyed the serenity from walking. I enjoyed the thinking. And I really started to see the pleasure of the walking, going back to that pleasure and pain principle.
Right.
By the end of the 21 days, I didn't miss a day. And again, I came back in and got my check from you.
Yes, you did.
But the point there was the reason why I was motivated to do that is I had this pain of if I didn't do that, I would lose this money. Now, all of us just can't find a friend and give half of our checking account to someone and say, hey, will you hold me accountable to that? So let's talk about the principle of the pain and the pleasure in that moment, Dr. Paul.
Right. This is such a great example, Dan, that you've illustrated with your story. There's all kinds of reasons to avoid doing what we've promised ourselves that we will do.
Yep.
That's the pain part. And there's all kinds of great reasons why we've promised ourselves to do it in the first place. That's the pleasure. And so we have this approach avoidance conflict that happens. And this is true in your example, Dan, as you're talking about the walking. What about your business? What about your relationships? Are there other places where this might apply? And I think that it does apply because we're talking about principles. What we did with the check, I'm so glad you kept that.
Absolutely.
That is so much fun.
Do you want it back?
No, I think you should frame it somewhere.
I will.
Use it in your coaching of people because that's a compelling story. What we did with the check was we manipulated your pain.
Yes.
That is simply what the check was all about. We manipulated your pain to where you felt, I no longer can avoid this because the pain of not doing what I've promised I would do is now greater than the pain of actually doing it.
Absolutely.
And you get to have pain either way. Whether you change or you don't. Right. You know what, Dan? Maybe you could talk about that for a second too, because we kid ourselves sometimes into thinking that the now pain is the greater pain, when really the later pain is what causes the most distress for us. Do you have a thought about that?
Yeah. So think about our minds. Our minds are these amazing things, and our brains are always wanting to protect us. You know, back in the day when we were cavemen running away from lions trying to kill us, it's a fight or flight. Our brains, they want to protect us from what it feels is painful things, but not always is it in our best interest. And so we really have to kind of do a brain hack. We have to remap to tell our brains that what I'm doing is actually pleasurable, because if our brain thinks it's pain, we're gonna say, hey, I'm motivated, I want to do this, and everything in our brain is gonna say, oh, guess what? That's painful.
No, don't go
Let's
there.
not do that. So let's go back to my example here. Sitting on the couch watching Netflix, is that pleasurable or painful? It's pretty pleasurable. I probably have a soda in my hand, enjoying whatever I'm watching. It's pleasurable in the moment. And I'm not saying Netflix is bad. There's always balance in everything. But when I was not exercising and I was doing that all the time, the pleasure was kind of wearing off. So the pain of going on a walk, oh man, I got to get up, I got to put my tennis shoes on, I got to get outside, I got to go for a walk when I could just sit on the couch. So we're talking about the now pleasure and pain. Well, let's take it on the later. Let's say I never exercised and I just sat there and watched Netflix every day with my soda. So the pleasure is, yeah, I don't have to do very much. It's still enjoyable. But the long-term pain of not getting exercise all of a sudden is I'm out of shape. I don't have as much energy. I can't run around with my son and play basketball. I don't have as much confidence. So let's take those and let's flip it around and make those our pleasure. Now I have energy. I'm outside with nature. I'm feeling confident about myself. And action begets action. When we start to feel things, it begets further action. So if we're doing positive things, those are going to turn into other positive things that we're doing. So all of a sudden, we flip it around and it says, and again, we're going to extremes here. If all I'm doing is sitting and watching TV, that is actually now the painful thing. And the pleasurable thing is being out and walking around, getting that exercise. And so all of a sudden, when we convince our mind of that, our mind is then, yes, let's get our tennis shoes on because I know the long-term pleasure that's going to provide. And so our mind is on board with us. We can then get out of those roadblocks that aren't really even our fault. Sometimes it's our mind working against us. But when we understand that, that allows us to then take more control of our motivation because we all want to be motivated. We all want that upgrade. We all want to do better. I mean, that's natural human emotion. We all want to create and be creators. But we're also human, and sometimes we get in our own way.
You're talking about long-term, short-term, now and later.
Yes.
One of the hurdles that we get to overcome from a psychological standpoint has to do with the now and the later. For you to get up and do what you've promised yourself you would do means you're going to experience some mild pain right now. You will gain the pleasure, but that comes a little later.
Yes.
If you were to avoid it, you get to have some pleasure right now because it's pleasurable to avoid the pain, right?
But it's minimal.
But you create a greater level of pain later on. Your mind will always see now pain as greater than later pain. Unless you consciously override that, your mind will always see now pain as greater than later pain. That's why we did the check, because it manipulates your pain. We drive up the pain by about 5K and we make it now.
I felt it.
And you felt it. And so the now pain, your mind is going to avoid that at all costs.
Yes.
So that's a little trick that you can do. And you can use a coach like Dan or myself to hold you accountable. But there's other ways to do this without actually writing a check. As you get real about the pain. Is it painful to strap on the shoes and go for a walk? Well, yeah, but how painful?
Sure.
Compared to not being able to get out and do activities with your son, for example. There's a clear difference in the pain, but one's now, one's later. So you get clear about that. Be honest with yourself, really, about the pain.
Absolutely. And so really, I mean, to get motivated, find out what it is that you want. I'm a list writer. I love writing lists. And one of the things that I've done is I take a little 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and I write a line down the middle and I put the pros on the left side and the cons on the right side. And I list, what is it that I want and what am I willing to sacrifice to get that? And then, there's obviously pros and cons on either side. But having that list helps me to visually see that if I stick to this, what is that ultimate result? And we have to have that long-term vision. Because for us to be motivated, the best things in life usually take time. They take effort.
Oh, yeah.
But when we can see that vision, and then it's important, Dr. Paul, to hold that vision in our mind, to visually see yourself. We talk a lot about becoming who we are now. So in other words, let's say, again, going back to this example, when I want to be in better shape, you taught me a great lesson that we don't talk about, I want to be in shape or I hope to be in shape. We wake up in the morning, we say to ourselves, I am a fit, in shape person. I exercise, I feel good. And the more that you say that to yourself, even though you might mentally think, that's not me. I'm not doing that. But you can actually override that, and guess what? You start to believe it. And when you believe it, you start to do it. And when you do it, you actually become what you said you were. It's pretty crazy, but it works.
There's actually some power in your mind.
A little bit.
And what you think matters. Right. And it's always on a spectrum anyway.
Yes.
Am I fit or not? Well, you're more fit than some and less fit than others.
So you are fit.
Pick a position.
Exactly.
Right. You've probably had some experiences like Dan. These are things that we're constantly working on. We've got some courses for you that will help to power up your positivity in every aspect of life. Check it out down below in the description.